just to elaborate on what Dr. Marie said. So I'm Megan, and I'm a learning experience designer at Groundflr. And technically, we are a digital learning agency. So we collaborate with clients around the world, both corporate clients and education clients. So universities, TVET colleges, and we essentially help them strategize and develop online learning material. So sometimes it's like a once-off learning artifact. Other times it's a full-scale online learning solution, where it could be a corporate client that's wanting to implement online learning within their organization as a whole, in which case we help with the consulting and actual strategizing and implementation and change management around that. And then also partnering with university institutions to help them take their content online. Okay, I'm going to share a file, share my presentation. And then we can get going.
I can also share on your behalf.
It's okay, it's uploading now and it's done. It's getting there. There we go. Okay. Let's go. Okay, perfect. So as I mentioned, my name is Megan, and I'm joined here today by my colleague Tessa Dyer, who is a learning designer at Groundflr. So she works on a lot of our corporate products, as well as some of our university institution products. And so she's joining to help be my timekeeper, and also because she has a lot of value to add around the actual on-the-ground work when it comes to developing online content. So what I want to just start with is really looking at what are we going to cover in this session. So some of you may be familiar with the concept of design thinking. Others may not be so familiar with the concept of design thinking. One of the things to keep in mind is when it comes to thinking around any sort of process, whether it's a system, whether it is, in our case, content development, there really are a number of different ways that you can approach it. So there's your more traditional systems thinking approach. There's your more scientific approaches. There are business or operations approaches when it comes to processes, sort of more your traditional project management approaches. There's your creative things and your analytical approaches. And really, what design thinking is good for is it's kind of a combination of creative but also analytical and systems approaches to thinking about a problem and then coming up with a really great solution. And so we're going to cover this in more detail just now, but what I really want to just start getting you to think about is around how do we design learning solutions that actually help solve our learners' problems. So, and when I say problem, it could be something like there's a knowledge gap. So in a more traditional university setting, there's specific outcomes and milestones and curriculum that needs to be covered, and that could be your problem in a sense. In a more informal learning environment, there might be, for example, like very specific workplace skills and functional competencies and expertise that a learner needs to be able to A, acquire, and then B, actually apply in a real world context. And so when we're thinking about design thinking, what we really are saying is we're saying, how can we essentially solve human problems? And I think the design thinking process is something that is used a lot in like product design, in application design. And so you'll see as we progress throughout this workshop that we do touch on elements like user experience and user interface. And the reason for that is because within a design thinking framework, the learner, or to use design thinking terminology, the end user or the consumer of this product or service really is at the center of all of the decisions that we make. So I'm pretty sure that if there are any of you that have had experience in either being involved in an online program development process, that really what you're trying to do is you're trying to meet the needs of the learner. And the types of learners that we encounter and the types of learners that we're designing for are extremely vast and extremely different. I mean, yeah, Dr. Marie was involved in a workshop that we had a while ago, talking about, you know, how do we design for the learner? How do we design effective learning content when there's such a variety of learner profiles that we're trying to solve for? And so really what we're trying to do is make sure that that doesn't fall flat. I've been involved in projects where, you know, we can spend so much time and so much energy and so much money developing what we feel is a really, really effective, it looks great, it's you know, based on effective teaching principles and learning principles, but actually as soon as we deliver it into the hands of the learner, it falls flat. And I think that's often where online learning gets a bad reputation, in that a lot of people, they will put time and energy and money into developing online learning solutions, and then they don't see the results that they'd hoped for or the results that they thought they would get. And what we really need to do is come right back to the beginning and say, are we actually solving the problem that our learners are facing, that they're encountering, and how are we designing and developing solutions that actually meet their needs, not just from a content point of view, not just from a delivery point of view, but also in terms like how are we asking them to engage with and interact with the content. So just out of curiosity, can I raise your hand if you are involved in course design and development at your institution, and how many of you use the traditional ADDIE process? Okay, Irene, Andele, Heinrich, Yolandi. Oh, okay, so quite a lot of you. Is there anybody who uses a different process to the traditional ADDIE process? Okay, so I'm going to assume then that ADDIE is our typical process. I thought it would be, but I just wanted to make sure. So ADDIE is the industry standard, for want of a better term, when it comes to the process that most of us use to design and develop and implement online learning. So generally, ADDIE is typically a waterfall approach. Yes, Andrea, I think that's a really, really good, it's a really good point. And I think later on in the workshop, we'll be able to see how we can implement some design thinking tools within the ADDIE process. So I think something to remember about design thinking is that there isn't one way of doing design thinking. Design thinking is it's a methodology similar to like agile. It's a way of thinking about process. It's a way of thinking about each step in a process. So we're not saying that we're throwing ADDIE, you know, not throwing the baby out with bathwater. ADDIE is the typical process, and institutionally, both in terms of corporate companies and universities, it's the one that is used to project plan, to capacity plan, all of those things. So we're wanting to make sure that we are working within the ADDIE framework for you. And we're going to look to see how we can implement design thinking tools within this process. So for those of you who aren't familiar with ADDIE, Addy on paper, Sam, yes. So 100, yeah, so Addy is what we would traditionally call a waterfall approach to well, to development, which means that typically, or most traditionally, you cycle through one phase at a time. So you start and complete your analysis phase in its entirety before you move on to design, before you move on to development, then implementation, and then evaluation. Whereas SAM is what we would call an agile approach, systems approximation model, which would be more of an agile approach to content development, where you cycle through things over and over again, thus iterating as you go along. So the SAM model would be better or better suited to design thinking like principles, but at the same time, where SAM gets tricky and where Addy wins is that it's easier to predict and plan using the Addy model. It's very hard to control scope within an agile process, which is why a lot of corporate e-learning agencies or companies and universities tend to prefer the Addy process. So as you can see, I've said here, so pros, it creates predictability. So you know that for every project, you're going to follow the same steps. You likely have your templated artifacts that you need to complete in each phase. And what's really nice is that you ensure sign off at each point in the process. So you're not going to get to implementing content to learners where then a stakeholder comes back and like, I don't like this, I want to make this change, and then you've got to go all the way back to the beginning with money you have to spend on this course design, or it could be a client that says, this is how much money I have to spend. Using the Addy model is a great way to constrain scope, because at the end of the design phase, you know exactly what you're going to be developing and how much time and money you have to spend on developing each of the artifacts. The cons of that is that it's not very agile. So once you've signed off on a phase, to then go back and make those changes, like I said earlier, becomes that much more expensive. And then it's not very learner-centric. So, and I think this is somewhere that is debatable, because depending on how you do your analysis phase, you might spend a lot of time looking at who your potential learner is, and really understanding what their unique context is, what their tech savviness is. Have they ever learned online before? Have they not? Are they comfortable in an online environment, or are they not? And so that really does depend on, I suppose, the institution or the person who's doing the course analysis in terms of how in-depth they go. But what we find really is that people tend to skim over the analysis phase, and they spend the majority of their, what we would call A&D, is in the actual design or curriculum planning phase. Because that's the fun phase, right? That's where you really get to dig into how the content is going to be covered. You really get to be creative around making sure that the content aligns to your outcomes, designing and developing assessments, etc. And if you're an instructional designer, that's really where instructional designers tend to want to spend most of their time, because it's like completing like a little puzzle. So you get to be creative, but at the same time, you get to be creative within a contained space. So most learning designers really enjoy that part of the course development process. So, and whereas, yeah, so just in terms of that, we've based at Groundflr, we came in using Addy. And slowly but surely over time, we've looked to see where we can become more flexible, more agile, where we can bring in more design thinking principles and tools to be able to essentially better serve our learners. So I think that's something that we can all agree on, is that when we're designing and developing course content and material, we're always thinking about what's best for the learner. And I think that's the golden rule that drives us as educators. And so, as we're going through this process, that's what we're always going to keep in mind as well, is what's best for the learner. Okay, I'm just going to, let me find my thing again. Okay. What I want to spend a little bit of time now is really looking at, oh, my slides are in the wrong order. I do apologize. Sorry about that, Tess.
Yes.
Sorry, this is the wrong order. Hey, I've picked up the wrong one.
Yeah,
okay, that's fine. Here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go. This is perfect. Okay, so fine, we'll deal. Okay, what I'd like to do is break up into smaller rooms. Marie, how many of us are there in the session?
There's 17 participants.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Marie, can we split everyone into breakout rooms?
How many in a group?
Let's do
groups?
4. Let's do 4 groups.
4 groups. Okay, I'll do that for you. You can just tell me when I need to move them out of this room.
Okay, so let me do the instructions first. So what I want us to do is, before we get into the very, very nitty-gritty details of design thinking, is spend some time thinking about who is your learner. So in whichever context you come from, I want you to spend some time thinking about each of these 10 elements. So think about who your traditional learner is. Give them a name, give them an age, give them a gender. What is their relationship with technology? If you were to rate their tech savviness on a scale from like 1 to 5, or even simpler 1 to 3, how would you rate their tech savviness? So when I say tech savviness, I don't just mean competence, but also confidence when it comes to engaging with tech. Then the motivation to learn. Is this something that they are being mandated to do? Is this something that they're doing out of their own, desire to learn? Things like prior education, what environment are they going to be learning in? What are some potential barriers to learning? How do they communicate? How do they prefer to communicate, in person, verbally, over messaging? And what is their preferred learning style? So in your groups, if you can think about one of your typical learners, and you might have more than one, and that's absolutely fine, but you can just share one with your group and just go through each of these points with your group members. And then when we come back as a bigger group, we're just going to share so we can all get an idea of like who is the type of learner that everybody is essentially designing for or developing content for within their institution. All right, Marie. So we're going to give you 10 minutes to do that in your group of 4. So around about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes per person. And then we'll bring you back into the bigger group and then we'll share collectively.
Okay, Megan, quite a few people have left the group, so I wonder if
so we'll just do 3 groups, then it's perfect.
Yeah, so let me just do that over and I'll make it 3 groups. Okay, because you and Tessa is also going into groups. I just want to move her out. I was now prepared and then suddenly...
No, I know. I saw. As soon as there's collaboration, people tend to show up.
In the meantime, can people just take a photo of your slide?
Yes, of course.
What to discuss, But it looks to me now that I've removed you and Tessa, and there we go. Goodbye, everybody.